Hi there. My name is Geneva, Mayne, and I have with me my co-host Kristen Ruiz and our special guest Brian Petty. In today's episode, we are exploring considerations for surviving in a profession and possibly thriving where you are a minority, and we'll also discuss transitioning careers from performance to clinical work.
Yeah, and to get started today, let's chat quick about what's new and what's good. So, for me personally, this is going to sound a little cheesy, but I am celebrating a community of being in a community of passionate people. Like in a 4-day span this past week, I was able to reconnect with people I haven't seen in a bit. So, we had one singer of ours from Germany who was here in New York. So, we got to connect and work together in the same space, which just felt so good. And then we had a get together here at my place with like 30 musicians and singers. And we just had a blast making music, laughing, telling stories. And the very next day, my dear colleague, who actually is going to be a guest on the podcast, so he'll be visiting us here at Agentic Voice in a couple weeks, but his name is Jeremy A, and he was visiting here in New York from Arizona, so we got together. And so I think what's new and good for me is just reconnecting to the energizing power of connection, that blending of energies, the vibrant flow of ideas that stretch your thinking, that grow you, and just the love and how rejuvenating it is. So for me, that's what's new and good.
Yeah, that's the power of social support. It's just so regulating. It feels just good, How about
Yes.
you, Brian? What's new and what's good?
New and good. Well, let's see. What is new? Today, new is my kid is in town, and he and my husband, if you hear them outside, they're at the kitchen table talking about colleges. They're going on the magical mystery tour of college visits. So I think they're going to go to they're going to Emory tomorrow,
Nice.
and then let's see, where else? Vanderbilt, Duke, Carolina, the great schools in this area.
That's
So,
nice.
so
That's so
they're about to
exciting.
be on a father-son road trip, which should be super fun. But they're planning their attack
Oh
at
my
the
goodness.
table.
Brian, I'm feeling it with you. My daughter is doing the same thing. We're going through the colleges, starting to plan what what drives make sense. So
Right.
yeah, so maybe talk about peer support. I'll be
Yeah,
texting
for
you
sure.
like,
Isn't
oh,
it amazing how hard it is? It's so competitive now. I don't know. I was talking to my mom when I was home last week, and I was saying I just don't remember it being that competitive whenever I was doing my own schooling. I just kind of showed up at, at the college that my dad taught at, and uh, and it was like I turned right instead of turning left into the high school. So I don't know. I don't remember a lot of it, but I'm really, you know, crossing my fingers for the folks who have to go through a lot more rigmarole in order to get into college these days.
oh my word.
Yeah, it definitely feels high stakes just with, the price alone. It's like,
Oh,
got to make a good decision, got to make a good match.
that's right. The price and everything. And just we could probably spend an entire session of this talking about getting into ComDis school too. So there,
Yeah, that's true.
yeah,
So speaking of going into ComDis school, I am kind of wrapping up my doctoral studies. I finally have my degree conferred, which is great. And this is my last week at the Emory Voice or Summer Research Fellowship. And that just it feels good. I'm glad I had that experience and met all the wonderful team at Emory, but kind of like a little sad because I made some really good connections here. But I am looking forward to going back home because I'm a little bit homesick too.
hmm
It's been, a little bit over 2 months. And coming off of the high of PAVA, the Pan American Vocology Association Symposium, was more than I could have expected. I got to co-present a special topic with Judith Wozak, and it was so well received. I was like overwhelmed. And I'm glad I got to go through it. I got new opportunities. So I'm going to get to speak at the Mayo Clinic.
Ooh.
in November, which is like, I never anticipated that.
In Rochester, Minnesota?
So the way that it's organized, it's a special talk, and I believe it's the first one where you talk to the whole community. So the Minneapolis
Oh, and it's
locations,
Jacksonville, and then also where's the one? I think isn't it in Arizona someplace?
yes.
Okay.
And so I'll be speaking to ENTs and SLPs on my, research that I conducted at Kane. And that's just so humbling. I'm just the trajectory of how things are opening up for me, I would never have scripted.
Well, you should be very proud of that. It doesn't open for everyone. It opens for people who have good ideas and know how to communicate them, and that's you.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you so much. Thank
And
you
in
so
your
much.
work, there's so much light. It is needed in this world. Yeah.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Thank you so much.
Mhm.
So speaking of light, I know that Brian sheds a lot of light himself. Like, how you can just be attracted to people and the energy that you give off. And I got this right away when I first met Brian. So I'm happy to kind of introduce you to listeners who don't know you for our next segment, which is Experience, Strength, and Hope. So I'll say that our guest today is Brian Petty. For those of you who do not know, Brian holds a Bachelor of Music in Voice Performance from Oklahoma State University, as well as a Master of Arts degree in Vocal Pedagogy and in Speech and Hearing Science, which are both from the Ohio State University. He is in clinical practice at the Emory Voice Center here in Atlanta and has specialized in disorders of the professional and singing voice for over 20 years. He is a past coordinator of Special Interest Group 3, Voice and Voice Disorders for the American Speech Language and Hearing Association, and is a frequent national lecturer on the clinical management of voice and upper airway disorders. And we're so happy to have you. And so I'm going to invite you to share your very human story with us on your career progress and development, and how you transitioned from opera and performance to being a clinician, and all of the lessons you learn along the way in 30 minutes. Go.
Oh, I know. 30 minutes go. I know, right? No, it's interesting. I do this talk about with my one of my oldest friends in speech pathology is Rita Patel, and she is currently at Indiana University, not a small shakes in terms of singers at Indiana. So they have a vigorous program, and one of the things we talk about is this whole weird path that I ended up taking, which I think it's illuminating in several ways. First, for me, it was illuminating in realizing that I have a pretty voice when I sing. Everybody likes to listen to it. That's literally the tiniest fraction of what you need in order to be successful in that field. Like literally the tiniest. I like did not I realized I realized towards the end of my master's degree, I was 24 and I was like, wow, I don't know, man. I don't know whether I can do this. I don't think I have the particular skill set for this, right? So I took a year off. Um, Worked at where did I work? I worked at McGraw-Hill, the book publisher, in their customer service department in a call center, and I also had a job. I moonlighted. I had two jobs. That was my main job, and then I moonlighted at Victoria's Secret, also in the call center. So when you would call and order something from Victoria's Secret, I would answer. And so now my sister said I know too much and I must be killed now. But but yeah, it was crazy. But yeah, it was one of those things where you're sitting there. It's kind of a quiet day at Vicky Secrets, and you're like, and I was sitting there going, okay, how many DMAs, Doctor of Musical Arts, how many DMAs do I know who are working in customer service right now? Off the top of my head that day, I could think of six.
Okay.
And, and that was
Wow.
the moment. I was like, okay, so I'm gonna need to think of something different to do. And that was when I thought of uh, thought of ComDis. At Ohio State, at least back then, they made you take a certain number of classes outside of the School of Music, and everybody complained and moaned about them, and I did too. But one of them I loved, and it was Mike Trudeau's voice disorders class in ComDis. It was the graduate course, and it was just fascinating and delightful, and I just loved it. And I thought again, and I'm like, well, gosh, maybe if I'll reach out to Dr. T. Um, and that was the first Dr. T I knew. There's Andrew Tkachuk at our group,
That's right.
T too. But yeah, Dr. T was welcoming and my advocate for being admitted to the program, so much so that I didn't realize how much he advocated for me until years later, until probably 10 years ago or so did I really completely understand how much he advocated for me. So yeah, so then I started there and and learned how to be a speech pathologist, which was a big transition from being a singer, let me tell you, or a singing teacher, right? Singing teacher, at least some of it is still about you, but as a speech pathologist, none of it is about you. That's the hard thing for a singer to get around, is that you've got to get your head around the fact that it's never going to be about you again, ever. It's about the patient. It's about that person who needs you. And
And there's a letter that you shared with me that you sent to the ASHA leader that really communicate that. And I want to share parts of it later on, but continue. I'm sorry to interrupt.
oh no, that's good. It was interesting. I mean, I remember my dad asking me, because it was such a departure from the type of work that he had anticipated me doing. He was like, you really need to make sure that you're really good at this, because people are depending on you. You could hurt somebody if you
Mm-hmm.
like just kind of half-assed it or whatever.
Mhm.
And not that I would, but still.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was a thing I remember. It's like, no, I got to be good at this,
Mm-hmm.
because the reason I you have to the reason I went into it is so I could help people
Right.
and contribute to the community and you know increase the level of good in the world, right? Because that's
Yeah.
what we all want to do, right?
Right.
And I remember the thought, like, do I everybody was at that time kind of figuring out whether they were client people or patient people, you know what I mean?
Yes.
Right. And I decided I was a patient person. I was going to refer to the people that I work with as my patients,
Hmm.
because when you work with kids, sick people, and old people, your responsibility is different, right?
Hmm.
It's not just I have to be good at this. It's like I have to make sure I take, it's sort of a fiduciary responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
I take it very much to heart that I have to help you in the quest that you're on, and not have it be me telling you what I think you should sound like, or
Wow.
kind of just doing what's on the handout or whatever. It's important. You have lots and lots of responsibilities to these people who are vulnerable.
Yeah, and I even think that this is the part of evidence-based practice that people struggle with the most.
Mm.
Like, we love the research and talking about the evidence and what we know about the evidence and how we interpret that. And we like to rest on our clinical practice and expertise. But when it comes to incorporating what the patient or the client or the student or their family might want, or preference or value, that's a little bit harder because it's not always what we want.
Right, right. I would love to have everybody have Crystal and Bell-like tones and sound like, Dmitry Voristovsky all the time. But that's just not their thing. There's the concept of better enough.
Mhm.
And it's not really kind of a situation where you're sort of lowering your standards. It's it's you're using your skill set to get the patient where they want to be or need to be.
Right.
Mm,
Right.
Mhm.
yeah.
So after you left graduate school, where'd you go?
After I left grad school, that was Ohio State, and then we moved to Minneapolis, and I did my fellowship at a level one trauma center in Minneapolis. And it's funny. That was that was in 1999, and at that time you could get an acute care setting fellowship without ever having set foot in an acute care setting. And I did not, and I did. So we did that. That's where I learned about dysphagia. I mean, I'd taken the dysphagia course, but the actual day-to-day reality
Mhm.
of working and swallowing,
Hmm.
um, that was a real hurdle. And
Hmm.
talking about, making sure you don't hurt somebody, that's like one of the few times you really can.
Right.
And so it was a combination of acute rehab, inpatient dysphagia work, and a little bit of voice,
Hmm.
like maybe 20% voice. And
And were
and
you with your husband at that time?
oh yeah, oh
Okay.
gosh, yeah, for 30 years, but
Okay.
but it's not quite 30. I think it's 28 now. I keep forgetting the number. Is that bad? That's probably bad. Um, but that's like the stereotype of the man who forgets his anniversary. And like, oh great,
Yes.
gay just means two of that. So, but no, it was after that finished my fellowship. I worked I worked on call at 14 different hospitals in the Twin Cities,
Mm,
which was crazy, and it was a lot of driving and a lot of nuttiness, but I got my head around and got to peek in at how everybody did things, right?
Mm.
Great.
And that was super useful. Like what's the culture like of this profession, and how do people talk to me? How do they talk to the patients? How do they talk to each other? And you know, what kind of person do you need to be in order to do this?
Mm,
And so that was really useful. Um, it was doing a lot of work that I didn't end up doing primarily, but that kind of skill set comes in handy every now and again.
Hmm.
The cognitive piece and language and um, brain injury kind of work,
Hmm.
and then at that point I um, moved from Minneapolis to Madison, where I spent 10 years at the UW-Madison Voice and Swallowing clinics. And then after 10 years there, moved here, which will be 10 years in January. It's
Ah, okay.
weird
Very
how
nice.
so.
And I look at Emory really as the Shangri-La of SLP voice world, honestly. Not that I know all of the different ones, but like, I've been an SLP for a while and I can recognize like a good environment when I see one. So
Oh yeah.
that's why I say that I'm a little bit, sad to be leaving, but I'm glad that I've had this experience. It's nice when you see a team working together, healthy in a non-toxic environment. You know what I mean?
It is important. It's and that whole thing, uh, the whole Emory thing started and was founded by Edie Hapner and Mike Johns. And so they started that whole program that seems to have taken off. And I think the way that you can tell that you've been successful professionally is when you build something and then you leave and it still runs well, right?
Right. It doesn't
And
fall apart.
yes, indeed. So, I have many things to be grateful to Edie for, but that's a big one.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, as we were planning for this, you shared with me some of the things that you had written because you're also, I don't think I said this in the introduction, you're pretty well published.
Well, for a non PhD, for a master's level speech pathologist, I kind of took up the mantle and saying like, no, You can do clinical research, well, just research. You can do research as a
Yeah.
master's level professional. You just need an idea, you need access to patients, and you need a little help. And I
Yeah.
think that's true of everybody.
Mhm.
Yes. And you shared with me two letters that you wrote, or one letter that you wrote to the ASHA leader. It was
Uh,
in response to an article that was written, or a letter that was written back in January 2010. So only just 12 years ago.
mhm.
And when you see how certain ideas have changed, but also how they're kind of reminiscent of what's going on now, I wanted to kind of bring that to the forefront. So this letter was written by Mary Eslack in the ASHA leader. It's entitled Conflict with Faith. And she's basically talking about how she's concerned that our ASHA dues are going to support constituency groups such as LGASP and the LGBT caucus.
Mhm.
Um, and she said a percentage of our dues are supporting this group. And then she says, as a practicing Catholic first and a practicing SLP second, it is in direct opposition to her faith to support the social platform of those engaged in a homosexual lifestyle and its promotion. Which kind of reminds me of the discussions that people are having now about critical race theory, just because it seems that people have a conflict with whenever our organization gets into social political issues,
Mm.
even though that they impact clinical care. Because one of the tenets of trauma-informed approach, which is kind of like what our podcast is focusing on as one of our three, focuses, is to respond to trauma, such as structural issues, through policies, practices, and procedures. So when you're responding in policies, you're getting at kind of laws at all levels, not just, federal government or state government, but, policies within the workplace. But then you responded, I'm just going to read a bit of your letter, and I thought it was right on. You said, focus on professional practice, March 1st, 2010. And you said, in the last year, the ASHA leader has featured several letters from ASHA members who felt the need to air publicly their distaste regarding the increased visibility and acceptance of fellow SLPs who self-identify as part of the GLBT community.
It's funny that it's GLBT back then, right? It wasn't long
Yes,
ago.
yes, it makes me chuckle. Yeah. In the most recent letter written by Mary Eslack, she claimed that science and integrity have become subordinate to political correctness, and that the professionally and morally obligated treatment of GLBT patients is not commensurate with support of their immoral lifestyles. And then you said, letters like these reveal nothing more than an individual opinion on a social matter, offer no meaningful insight into professional practice, and are inappropriate for a publication such as the Leader. Although ASHA does not provide financial support for multicultural constituency groups, ASHA policy, I love the focus on policy, regarding for support for diversity is clear. And frankly, the only person whose opinion matters is the patient. If a patient of Ms. Eslack who is gay or lesbian receiving treatment from reports an excellent therapeutic experience that involved treatment goals and tasks that were relevant to his or her life, then Ms. Eslack's personal opinions about the patient are irrelevant. And so getting back to what we were talking about earlier, when it comes to that three prongs of the evidence-based triangle, when you're incorporating patient perspectives, people can feel when you don't like them,
Yeah,
right?
for
People
sure.
can feel that energy. And so when you're in a helping profession, it's important to be able to love and respect and like people, right? No matter what their lifestyle is, even if you don't agree with their lifestyle, because as you said, it's an opinion.
Right, right. And
So,
back then it was interesting that there was a lot of that going on. And of course, we think about like she was all upset about, um, at that time anyway, was all upset about political correctness. And if you think about what that means, it's just being kind. And like, why would you not want to be kind? Well, because she didn't like people like me, and she didn't want to be kind. It felt good to not be kind to people like me. And I don't mind. I am hoping that over the last decade or decade and a half or something, that she and others who were struggling like that have found their way to a better place. I mean, there are a lot of people back then who really struggled with the idea of LGBTQ people being treated equally in terms of just civic and professional life. Lots of people, you know, I remember back not so long ago um, when the whole marriage equality thing was going on, people were yammering on about it, and I just reminded folks that yeah, I can get married now, but I get married on Sunday and fired on Monday.
Wow.
So, and in a lot of places you still can.
Yeah.
I sometimes will be conscious of my status as minority in the LGBTQ community, but I'm also a minority in speech pathology as a guy.
Yes.
So that's kind of wonky, and so you have to like approach it being like everybody's individual or individual experience as a member of whatever they identify with. There's some similarities and some great big differences too. And so, but the similarity is that everybody wants to be valued and respected and treated with kindness and at least not just tolerated but respected.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's okay to demand that
Hmm.
of people. And that's not being pushy, and it's not being getting out over your skis or whatever. It's it's exactly what you should demand of yourself. One of the things that I really focus on with my fellows that I work with is because usually we get we along with a lot of the other dedicated voice centers get our pick of the litter as far as the folks who come in wanting to do a voice fellowship. So a lot of times those folks who come to us for the year are are already pretty qualified. They have good skills clinically, as we hone those while they're here. But one of the things that I really try to push and establish in them is their sensation of being allowed and expected to demand equal treatment in the workplace and to set reasonable and appropriate professional boundaries and things like that, to stick up for yourself. And that's the thing that I really hope our fellows and my colleagues are out there doing and teaching other people to do. It's it sometimes feels a little bit like you're stepping out on faith or something, but you're not really. You're just being an adult in the world, and that sometimes means you have to say no and push back a little bit in a professionally appropriate way.
Yes, and I think this is what a lot of people who are in majority groups might not understand about people who are in minority groups,
Hmm.
whether it's race or, sexuality or ability,
Hmm.
is that when you're walking in a majority space as a minority, your very presence ends up being a form of advocacy, right?
That's absolutely the truth.
Right. And it carries with it, um, I'm using the word burden for lack of a word burden. It
It, c-
carries,
it can be, yes.
yeah, it carries with it another load, another hat that you have to wear within that group. And so when you're in a profession like speech pathology, which is overwhelmingly, white, female, um, mainstream American culture,
Mhm.
anyone who is outside of that is carrying within this field the burden or the load of moving the profession in such a way that it can learn to serve people of all different walks of life. And it's another burden aside from, carrying your education and getting your education and getting experience and all of this kind of thing. You can't just focus on yourself, as you say. You're focusing on a group and a larger picture. And so it's not, you don't have the privilege to not advocate for
Right.
policies, can't stay on the sidelines. So what do you think about that? Because ASHA has sometimes had like a non-response position. What is your thought on that?
Well,
Especially in the context of a conversation around dues.
oh, about dues. Well, anytime anybody gets a bee in their bonnet about, insert group they don't like here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anytime they get a bee in their bonnet about that, it always comes down to, I don't want my dues paying for it's just like, I don't want my taxes paying for, well, my dues pay for a lot of things that don't involve me. My taxes pay for schools in Atlanta that my kid doesn't go to. But it's important for the community to have an educated population, at least to a point. We've got to teach the kids to read. We've got to teach them to live in the world. So yeah, that it's not all about you,
Right.
right? And so yeah, I've almost always felt really warmly accepted um, by my speech pathology colleagues. Not always. There are a couple of times when I wasn't, and that was the point where you have to decide, do I say something? Because it's going
Right.
to cost me this job if I do.
Right.
And I did, and it did. And so, yeah,
And what's the cost? What is the cost to you, do you think, if you don't?
you die inside a little.
Yeah,
The
I
thing.
agree with that.
There's this feeling that you get, and it's that feeling that you get like when you feel like you're trapped,
Mm-hmm.
and like I or that you're keeping something important inside that you can't, that you really should be advocating for. And then, what do you do if you keep that inside? You stay in that job and be miserable? No.
Right.
Sometimes the world tells you that you need to move on from that job, and before I do, I'm gonna tell you about your business. And
Right.
right, there were a couple of times where I had to sit people down and explain to them what it was that they have done, and
Mhm.
what the effect was like on me as a junior member of the team.
Right.
Um, so it does cost you. Both those times I lost that job, but
Mhm.
there's always another job. You can always find some other place to work. As a
Yeah.
speech pathologist, are you kidding? There's everybody's looking for a SLP someplace. So
Yeah.
best to just get that out into the open where it can do some good.
Right.
Well, I love that. And that idea of sharing of stories and of the lived experiences
Mhm.
that we move through. I mean, and what's happening right here today, like the sharing of stories. We know that discrimination is a social determinant of health. And the flip side of that is social support, right? So when we're thinking about trauma-informed voice care, we're a major component of that is emphasizing peer support, right? For that safety, it creates hope and trust and collaboration. So the sharing of stories and lived experiences, it promotes recovery and healing and that restored wholeness afterwards. A singer and friend of mine says, free voices, free voices. And
Mm.
I think owning your story and owning your voice in a space, I think as each of us live into that, we are going to then inspire those around us that they can free voices too. So I think free voices, and I think that's really important to think about. And I think that's also the brilliance of singing, that singing of human stories and experience and connection. And sometimes you're singing your own story, but sometimes you're singing the story of somebody else.
Most times you're singing the story of somebody else, right?
Exactly. And so then you're creating this connection, this empathy, hopefully reconciliation, that there's so much. And I really what you're doing here, sharing your story with us and the listeners, I mean, this is exactly it. So thank you so much for doing that. So let me ask you, how can a community of voice professionals use peer support, social support to encourage vocal agency and vocal freedom? Like how can we do this?
Well, I think the key, it's interesting when I was running the SIG group, people would oftentimes come up and other people from other specialty areas would ask me about it, and I would say, we're a small group, but we're scrappy, and we just get her done. The voice folks just get her done, and we will find a way through and around and forward, right? And it's still the truth, even now. I think the key is making sure that you have that support of your colleagues, which, I mean, that's just critical to have people who have the same training as you, kinda, and the same, certainly the same interest and goals professionally, and bouncing ideas off of you. You need a team in order to do this. It really does take a team to to do voice work. We
Yeah, it's not a solo sport.
no, no, it's not. And even if you're working by yourself, you've still got Sig 3. That's like a giant group of, well, not giant, but it's a small and scrappy group of people who are out there who want to do the same thing you do. And maybe they do the same thing you do, but they do it in a slightly different way. And maybe that slightly different way that person does it speaks more to the patient that you're with, that you're struggling with, right?
Hmm.
So even now, I was just talking to somebody at work the other day and saying, like, I've seen this guy for 16 sessions. It's a lot for me, and we seem to have hit a wall. I wonder if one of these other folks that I work with would be able to say the same thing in a different way. Like when
Collaboration.
when you're at a master class and you get up there and you're gonna sing, Dalla Sua Pace or whatever, and for the 14,000th time, and you're gonna go up and sing Dalla Sua Pace, and your teacher's been working with you and working with you, and you're not getting anywhere, and then this other person you just met 5 minutes ago says a slightly different way, and it clicks, and then it works, and your teacher's out there just going like, right? And but that's just it. The remembering that it's not about you,
Mm,
um, it's about the patient, and it being not about you means the way you do it isn't always exactly the way that's needed. And so maybe you need to learn how to do it in a slightly different way, or ask around to some colleagues, what would you do with this patient? Right? We all do it. You see it on the listserv all the time.
yeah, that's really powerful, that level of collaboration, because then it puts the singer or the client or the patient, it puts them center stage, and it's not about me and my ego. It's about what needs to happen to get them to their next level, to get that transformation that they're looking for. And we are talking about voice work. We're talking about the ability to communicate, whether it's
Hmm.
musically or through speaking. I mean, we're talking about a major piece of humanity here. So
Mhm.
it can't be about us as practitioners. It has to be about the person that's in front of us. And, I love the word scrappy. Like, if
Yeah.
you and your ingenuity and intuition can come up with it, fabulous. And when there's a wall, one of your colleagues is going to have ideas, and
Hmm.
it's going to spur new ideas that you didn't even think of before. So I think this is phenomenal. And actually, speaking of the idea of working with singers and speakers and voice users, there are a number of singers considering moving into the clinical profession, just like you did, right? So,
Mhm.
and I have a few, like the SLPs that are in my voice studio, they all started as singers first, right? And I actually have one that's finishing up her degree right now in speech language pathology. So that idea of singers moving into the clinical profession, we see it all the time. So I know you've spoken to grad students about like what singers should consider when moving to a clinical profession. What insights can you share with any singers or teaching artists who may be listening, who would love to glean some wisdom from you? So, what insights do you have moving from the profession of singing into the profession of clinical work?
I think the key for singers is to not shortchange ourselves. We get like this, oh, we're just a stupid singer or whatever, or we're just, they don't even call a lot of times, yeah, and you know this, when you go and sing with a symphony orchestra, a lot of times they will refer to the singers and then they will refer to the musicians.
Yes,
Like, I know, right?
yes.
I'm
Her
like,
pet
We're
peeve.
all musicians. Some are instrumentalists, some are
uh-huh,
vocalists, but yes.
exactly. It's so irritating. And that happens still today. It
Mhm.
happens still today. It doesn't happen really here in Atlanta, but it did in Minneapolis. They did.
Yeah. And singers are
Um,
socialized to accept that and to be dependent a lot. So we've got a
well,
lot of work in
yeah,
our singer culture to do. Yep.
exactly. And I was singing with a group at that time in Minneapolis called the Dale Warland Singers. And it was a kind of this super specialized chorus that an auditioned paid chorus that kind of specialized in Scandinavian music written 5 seconds ago, right? Or maybe still being written right this second. And so it was well respected and known in that region, and that happened to us even then. And so I think the key is to give yourself credit for the particular skill set that you have to have as a singer. You have to learn by reading, you have to learn by listening, you have to learn kinesthetically, you have to learn emotionally, you have to be able to manipulate all of those things at the same time while singing in one of 6 or 7 different languages. And you have to know the history of it. You have to know the history surrounding the history of the world during the time when this was created, this piece.
Mhm.
And you have to, and if you're a stage performer like an opera specialist, then you have certain skill sets that are required there, like movement and stage combat. You have to be able to fight somebody with a sword or hang upside down and sing a high B natural. Really? And so yeah, it's singers are a special breed of people. I can spot a
Mhm.
singer a million miles away, and every single one of them, I think, underestimates the skills that they have and the worth that
Mm.
those skills bring to their communities. A lot of times, I mean, don't you think that a lot of times, the studio is sort of the only safe place
Mhm.
for some of those kids learning to sing,
Yeah.
isn't it?
I think so. And we're working really hard. Like part of my work is training trainers and making sure that the trainers create a safe place because some studios even there, you know. Um, but yeah, it's a place where you can explore, and it's not about right or wrong, and it's not about proving. It's about expressing and discovery.
Exactly. And it's a safe place to make a weird noise,
Yeah.
right? That's another thing that kind of connects the singing experience and the speech pathology experience. You have to make a space for the patient or the student singer to make a weird noise.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Who wants that to happen?
Absolutely.
But you have to, I find a lot of times when I work with singers, I'm like, just I give you permission to make that ugly sound.
Hmm.
Right? You can go ahead and make the sound. Allow that to happen. The moment they allow that to happen, it stops.
Mm.
So you're talking about having respect for singers and having, singers really know their value, their power, their worth. And one of the things I'll just say, as we're wrapping up, that I've always admired and respected about singers is the singer's ability. We're talking about trauma-informed care, right?
Yeah.
The singer's ability and power to help regulate everyone who listens to them. They're literally like moving an audience to some emotional experience, depending on whether it is to inspire or appreciate beauty, or to be moved by, a sad love song, or, whatever it is, this power that singers have, which I've experienced many times, not by professional singers even, but also by professional singers. But I'm thinking of the context of like a church congregation where a singer can move a whole audience towards, feeling joy or, praise or gratitude. This is a superpower.
It's an act. Singing is an act of bravery every time it
Yes.
happens,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yes.
because you're getting up in front of a bunch of people you don't know and doing something that most people would feel kind of, I don't know, about doing, right? But you're doing it with intention, and you're
Yes.
sharing this thing that you've spent so much of your life learning to do, and you learn to do it for other people. It's never for you,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Like, never, you know. So yeah, singing is an act of bravery, and I think everybody appreciates bravery, no matter what form that takes. And
Right.
so it inspires other people. Well, if that person can do that, well, maybe I can be brave in whatever way is meaningful for me.
Yes. And even if, the person makes a funny noise in public that they didn't want to make, realizing that, in your position as leader or singer and having an audience listen to you, most people in that audience are rooting for you to recover
A
and deliver.
100%.
Yes.
They're rooting for you. They want you to hit that note.
Yes.
Right? Yeah, there's nobody out there. Even the other singers, who we got kind of a rap about that too. Even the other singers, they want you to sound good. They want to hear good singing. Nothing delights me more than hearing great singing, right? Of
Yeah.
whatever kind, right? It's just really special anytime it happens. And if you get to be in the room when it happens, then wow, isn't that great?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here and sharing with us. So, in this episode, we talked about transitioning careers within the voice world, and we discussed how peer support helps those who are experiencing adversity, stress, or trauma related to discrimination, and that shared stories of our lived experiences, these promote recovery and healing. So, thank you again so much for being here. It has just been a joy. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It was fun.
Yes.
Take care.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.